Hey everybody, it's me, Pete. I'm obviously not here today. I am down in scenic Fresno, California, not vacationing. I'm seeing my son Noah play with the All-State Honor Band, which is also amazing. So anyway, Tara Pennington, our intern, was supposed to be here today, but you can keep her in your prayers. She's still recovering from all manner of things that stemmed from her flu, which she had about 6 weeks ago, which turned into bronchitis, which turned into walking pneumonia, and she's still recovering from that. So we haven't even seen her for a couple weeks, and we're pretty sure she's still with us. But pray for her, and hopefully she'll be back soon. We miss her. So anyway, you get stuck with this little video dial in for me today, but really interesting text, and it really dials into what the video is that you just saw from Jay Baker. So let's just walk through the text and see where it takes us.
You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. You have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect.
When you read Jesus and what he has to say about conflict, this whole business of when somebody slaps you across the cheek, you're supposed to give them the other one, and when somebody wants your shirt, give them your cloak or your coat, all this stuff makes it real clear to me one great truth. And that is that Jesus never spent any time on a real playground. Here's the thing. When I was in middle school, me and a good friend of mine, I mean, we were good friends, Stephen. We were shadow boxing, before class started. And my shadow, unfortunately, got a little too close to Stephen's face. And I ended up clocking him right across the cheek. And apparently, my friend Stephen had never been introduced to the words of Jesus, because at that moment he did not turn his other cheek. He turned his fist toward me, and I immediately ran in the opposite direction. And I ran all around the gym because I did not want to get hit, which is very wise to do. And so anyway, I managed to stay away from his fists for the entire gym class. And somehow we got involved in other things, and it was getting toward the end of class, and it seemed like they calmed down. It was a total accident. Why would I want to hit my friend? And so we're all waiting in line and talking to some other friends, getting my backpack ready to go to the next class. And Steven, comes over. He's looking pretty calm and pretty careful and all that. So I'm like, oh, great. He's gotten over it. He knows it was an accident. So just as I'm ready, to say to him, hey, Steven, once again, man, I apologize. It was a total accident. He comes up and he totally decks me across the face. I'm like, oh man, I was not too happy about that, of course, and it hurt. But right after he did that, he looks at me and he says, "Okay, now we're even." And that was that. Stephen went on his way. I went on my way. We were friends, and everything was fine. That's playground rules. You do something to me, I do something to you. And this playground rules thing happens all the time, doesn't it? It happens on playgrounds. We see that, of course, and we can sort of laugh at that because it's kids. But it happens in marriages. A little snarky remark goes one direction. It's time for a snarky remark to go right back. It happens, it happens in ways that makes TV headlines, doesn't it? A guy's eating popcorn, making a little bit of noise with a cell phone, makes another person in the movie theater upset. Guy with the popcorn throws some popcorn, does something. The guy gets up, the man who's been hit by popcorn apparently, gets up, pulls out a gun, and shoots the guy. Or guy at a gas station, putting gas in his car, sees this car with some pretty thumpity thump music going on, and asks them to turn it down. The kids inside react, with sort of a playground mentality, and the guy at the pump freaks out. So what does he do? Well, of course, he pulls out a gun and unloads a whole magazine on these guys. Playground rules are everywhere. Playground rules exist. And sometimes we would look at Jesus and we'd say, man, you are just out of touch with reality. If you knew anything about how the world really worked, maybe you wouldn't have said what you said, because nobody does what you said we should do. I even came across this bumper sticker, which I have on the next slide. Check this thing out. Would it have been helpful for Jesus to have read that bumper sticker before he would have said what he did in the teaching? I mean, it's kind of hard to argue, isn't it? That all these things that this bumper sticker listed seem to come to an end after war. So is Jesus wrong? Is that the takeaway from our lesson today? Is the bumper sticker right? Well, if we think about it, the bumper sticker has an element of truth that these things did go away after war, but the war itself isn't what ended those things. The actual end of all those things that the bumper sticker talked about actually ended with the signing of papers, the signing of an agreement on the decks of ships between heads of state that recognized that enough bloodshed had happened, that enough sons and daughters had been lost, that enough children had been orphaned, that enough money had been spent on the machinery of war, that finally it was time to call uncle. And when they finally reached that point of maturity to recognize that the fighting needed to stop, they stopped the fighting. Because the war in and of itself leads to more war. Somebody eventually has to cry uncle. Somebody has to be a grown-up. And the violence has to stop. So treaties are signed. Treaties that are binding, that have teeth, that require accountability. But make no mistake, violence begets violence. What Jesus is calling for here is an end to playground rules. He's calling us to end the cycle of violence, so that when you get slapped across the face, and that happens in multitude ways, by the way, he's not asking us to be a doormat. Because actually what happens in the way the Jewish tradition thought back then is the way you would slap somebody in the face, and the way that Jesus is referring, is I would use my right hand, and I'd take my hand like this and backhand you against your right cheek. Well, in order for you to turn your other cheek to your assailant, is you would have to come back around like this and square up and look the person in the eye and say, here's my other cheek, take that one too. So it's not a matter of cowardice where you take the beating and you just stay down for the count. It's an act of great strength and a showing of mature resolve to look back into the eye of the person who hurt you and say, I'm not going to strike back. If you want to hit me again, that's fine. But I'm not going to play this game anymore. The playground rules are over. This is what Jesus was getting at with all the examples that he gave. It's all had to do with ending the cycle of violence and bringing an end to those things which we can't stand anyway and get us to a place that we really want to be. Well, it was all well and good. Jesus talking about going the second mile and all this, turn the other cheek. We can deal with that. Then he got a little nutty, and he had the audacity to say that we should love our enemies. Now, a little point in the text that I mentioned is that nowhere in the Old Testament does God say you should hate your enemies. That doesn't really show up. you definitely get that in some of the prophetic writings, and you read that in some of the prayers of David in the Psalms about how much he hates the enemies of God. But there's no command anywhere, technically. You can make a case for it, but there's no direct statement that says, I want you to hate your enemies. So Jesus is saying something that is culturally true. Everybody knows, well, we don't like our enemies, so we're going to keep hating our enemies because that seems like the appropriate thing to do. So when Jesus goes ahead and says, no, you need to love your enemies, that's a tough pill to swallow. The immediate people that the Pharisees, who were definitely in the crowd that day, would think of, they think about tax collectors, and they think of who they would call pagans, which would be non-Jewish of any stripe. Tax collectors because they seem like they sold out on Israel, and they've adopted this Roman regime and been a part of the problem. And anything non-Jewish because it would feel like they'd walked away from their very God. And if that was part of the problem with why they were under Roman rule in the first place. So that would have been the first people on their list. Now, who would it be for you? Really? Who are the enemies that you cannot imagine loving? Now, remember, Jesus isn't saying to like them. He's saying to love them. There's a difference. So drug dealers, maybe you don't know any drug dealers. I don't know if I know any drug dealers, so that's kind of an easy one. I don't like drug trafficking and all the things that leads to, so that's kind of hard. Murderers, rapists, pedophiles, child porn industry people. How about greedy CEOs who walk to the bank with gazillions of dollars and are okay with the average guy not making enough money to feed his family? You okay with that? You gonna love that guy? How about power-hungry politicians who seem to be out of touch with the way most of us live? How about that guy? Depending on which side of the aisle you sit on, you may either love or hate our president. So if you're on the hating side of the president, can you love the president? I don't know. Who is it for you? Who are the toughest people in your world to love? Because Jesus says we need to have an attitude of love toward even them. And that is not easy. Does he have any authority at all to talk like this? Does he have any business suggesting this? Did he ever actually do this? Well, yeah, I think we kind of know the answer to that. In fact, we realize that it's the way of Jesus that actually gets at the very thing we long for. Because don't we long for a world of peace? Don't we long for a world that gets along? Don't we long for a world of justice and fairness, where we can dream our dreams and pursue them? Isn't that what we want for everybody? Those are the ways of God, and the way of Jesus leads to that way of God, which leads to that beautiful shalom, that inspiring, inherently compelling shalom, that wholeness, that harmony, that everything we long for. That's how we get there. We're not going to get there through playground rules, through childish ways. Jesus is calling for a level of maturity and adulthood that's very difficult, but very right. And if anybody nailed it in terms of actually practicing this, it was Jesus. We have something to say about this from Word Biblical Commentary. Let's check out this quote in the next slide.
The true disciple does more than is expected. He or she is free from society's low standards of expectation, being subject only to the will of the Father. The conduct of the disciple is filled with surprise for those who experience it. This element of surprise relates closely to and reflects the grace that is central to the gospel. It is the unworthy who have experienced the good things of the kingdom, and as they have experienced the surprise of unexpected grace, so they act in a similar manner toward the undeserving among them. Kingdom ethics demands not mechanical compliance to rules, but a lifestyle governed by the free grace of God. And of course, Word Biblical Commentary nailed it, but so did the Apostle Paul, who totally understood what God was all about and what Jesus was all about. So one of his favorite letters he wrote was to the Philippian church, and this is what he wrote to them in the 2nd chapter. Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Therefore, God elevated him to the place of highest honor and gave him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Now we have a great example of this lived out in our recent memory. And I want to end with a video that tells the story of a people who had every right to want justice and playground rules to happen, but they decided to follow the way of Jesus instead. And after the video, the band's going to finish things off with one final song, and I would ask that that become your prayer as you leave today, and that as the offering is taken, that it becomes an opportunity for you to celebrate the goodness of God in your life. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for coming.
As the nation marks the anniversary this week of the Newtown, Connecticut school shooting, families of some of the 26 who were killed attended a vigil today at the National Cathedral in Washington. Prayers were offered for all of the victims of gun violence in this country, and that would include the 5 young Amish girls who were killed and 5 who were wounded just a few years ago in south central Pennsylvania. Jeff Glor tells us that out of the horror of that school shooting has come a lesson in forgiveness.
It's been 7 years since Terry Roberts' life changed forever. In October 2006, her 32-year-old son Charlie walked into an Amish school in Lancaster County and shot 10 young girls before killing himself.
I heard the sirens and saw helicopters. Then the phone was ringing and it was my husband. And he said, "I need you to come to Charlie's house right away." And I got out of the car and I looked at my husband, and these sunken eyes just saying, it was Charlie. That could not be. And yet it truly was. It was true. It was our son.
Roberts' initial reaction was that she had to move away. But the Amish came to her house the night of the shooting to say they wanted her to stay. Some of the victims' families attended her son's funeral.
There are not words to describe how that made us feel that day. And then for the mother and father that had lost not just one, but 2 daughters at the hand of our son, to come up and be the first ones to greet us. Wow. Is there anything in this life we shouldn't forgive?
Terry Roberts now shares this message with those who've experienced trauma. And every Thursday, she cares for the most seriously wounded survivor of the shooting, now 13. It's against Amish beliefs to appear on camera, so Donald Craighill often speaks on their behalf.
You have this mother who raised a son that did this horrific damage to this young woman. And the mother has the courage and the spiritual fortitude to come back and to care for this young woman. And the parents of the young woman welcome her into their home. It's a powerful, powerful story.
Those families in Newtown who may still have understandably conflicted feelings now, still less than a year later, what do you say to them?
Ask God to provide new things in your lives, new things to focus on, and that doesn't take the place of what is lost. But it can give us a hope and a future.
A future made possible for Terry Roberts because of forgiveness. Jeff Glor, CBS News, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.